Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And this is a place where one can go to escape the daily news. And we are talking about what I consider, anyway, hope you do too, fascinating topic or topics. Our guest in the first segment, which is going to be about 25 minutes long, is a friend and filmmaker, UFO researcher, Dean Alioto. And he will be discussing his new remastered 30th anniversary release of the enigmatic alien abduction film, the McPherson Tape. It's also known as the UFO Abduction. It's quite a story. If you haven't heard that before, then his whole story behind the scenes on what happened with this film, it is really, really amazing. It's really a fun story. And he was only 24 years old when he made this film, and it's the first found footage movie ever. It was 10 years before the Blair Witch Project. So, and I happened to get a peek at it the other night, and it was quite amazing. I couldn't believe he was only 24 years old and thought all that up. It was fantastic, actually. So I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. And for someone that's looking to support us, I know there's a lot of people that do, and I want to thank you for that. There is a Patreon link on our website, which is podcastufo.com. The show is actually my only job now, and I might be contemplating doing something else in addition. I may talk about that a little bit later on. So while you're over at our website, you want to check out this week's blog. That's by Charles Lear, and it's called The Socorro UFO Investigation. Charles, the blogger, is actually staying out in New Mexico. He's only about 20 miles away from where the Socorro incident actually occurred back in, I think it was 66. I may get the year wrong. I don't know. But anyway, he's right out there. So that kind of inspired him. It's a very good informational blog. A lot of really good facts. Check that out. Also, check us out on Facebook. That's basically facebook.com/podcastufo. Peggy, who's helped us out for many, many years, is still helping us out almost every day. Sometimes I do the weekends for, the latest in UFO news. There's about 20,000 people or so, or more actually, on that. So interact with them over there. It's a lot of fun, and there's always some really good UFO stories on that, and space news as well. And I want to thank Peggy for doing that. That's actually enough banter for me. And welcome to the show, Dean.
Glad to be here. I do have to say at the beginning here, I'm sorry. My schedule, I'm not going to be able to be here for your whole show. I can only do half. So
I know.
I just need to let you know that up front.
I'm really sorry that happened. Yeah. I don't know what to do.
Did you really
now.
only book me for half a show? Do you really feel that that's the extent of what I have to offer? That's probably being generous. Actually, halfway into the show, I'm going to change my name to Zelia, and then I'll have the full hour.
Yeah, you've got a lot of work to do during the break then. So anyway, Dean, it's always fun. You and I have quite a bit of fun, talking, on the phone and texting back and forth. A lot of really funny stuff. And recently, you put out this video of ABBA, SOS. It's on my website, podcastufo.com. You got to check it out. It is a riot. You lip sync with your girlfriend Allie, and you really did a great job. At first, I'm saying, who are those two other people with you? But your editing was great, and it's a blast. If you want to put a smile on your face, check that out. Again, it's on our website, podcastufo.com. Down a couple of posts called SOS of you doing ABBA. Awesome.
Yeah, we should talk about that and forget about talking about the other movie.
That's right.
Just talk about the making of this. It was funny because I'm editing my first UFO documentary. And, I've done documentaries for Discovery, A&E, and everything that are historical or crime-based documentaries. And this is the first one. And so there's so many things that I'm trying to do in this space, so I'm not derivative. And I'm just grinding it right now because I'm home and I can't go anywhere, right? No one can. And so Allie, who's also working at a home now, has her own desk set up and everything, she said, enough, you need to go outside and chill. So I go outside and I chill, and she's just taking a nap on the deck. So I go to close my eyes, I put my headset on, and I start listening to music, and I hear ABBA's SOS. And she's outside. She decides to come outside and join me, and she sees me sleeping with my foot twitching. And she goes, "What's going on your foot?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just going to this beat here." And I said, "I need you to stop working for an hour. We're going to go shoot this music video." So we went in, and then it took me 2 days to edit the thing because I have some special effects things going on. But
Yeah.
that's me resting.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Everyone needs to do something like that. Distractions are great. And that was a blast. I loved it. And I hope you do more of those. So let's talk about the McPherson tape. It's kind of funny. When you sent that to me, I thought you were sending me the studio version of what they did after the film. And I had no idea you were sending me the original film, which is really funny because I started to critique just a little bit here, just something really, really minor. And I said, for a studio version, or whatever. And you said, no, that's the original. And this, can you tell the story of how this came about? You had quite the budget to begin with, but it's the first found footage film. Really, it's pretty impressive. So go ahead.
It is a classic case of necessity over budget. All of my idols in film school and growing up had all made their first film by the age of 25. And so here I was on the precipice of turning that quarter century mark and had to make my first film. And like that was going to get me in some club or something. And so I had a buddy of mine who was a high school schoolmate who wanted to be a producer, and he wanted to be a producer to the tune of $6,500. And so I laughed and said, yeah, the only thing I could do with that is make a home video. And this is 1988, actually. And so I went ahead and moved on and thought I got to come up with something else. How am I going to raise money, blah, blah. And then I started reading Whitley Strieber's book, Communion. And then I lived in San Francisco at the time, which is where I'm from, and I was flying to LA to do a pitch. And as I was leaving, the sun was setting, beautiful, dusk was past dusk. The sun was now hiding from the earth. And so, wait, is that a flat earth comment that I just made?
Probably, yeah.
No, not hiding from this. We hide from it. And so anyway, I look out the window and I'm thinking, God, what if this is the last time that I was looking at Earth and I was being abducted? And then by the time I touched down, I called them and I said, we're going to make a movie with that budget. So I got back and thought, I really want to experience this. I want to experience being abducted without actually being abducted. How would I do that? And so the conceit was a home video, and to do it like this is happening real. And so I hired improvisational actors, shot it all outside of San Francisco. And I had a 20 beat list of all the things that I wanted to cover. We rehearsed it for a couple of weeks and then went out and shot it in one night.
You did that in one night. Unbelievable. And, I got to tell you, the family is so natural. I mean, they were improvisational actors, but they did it so well. They were acting just like your typical normal dysfunctional family. I mean, even the little girl was great too. I mean, everyone did such a convincing job. It really does feel like a natural situation. So what happened after the film was done? Where did it go and what happened?
So it was funny. I showed it to one of the actors' parents. She was his mother was a casting director, and on the project, and so she watched it. And I had done something which was I wanted to have overlapping dialogue, because that was going to be natural, and that's how people would talk. And Robert Altman had been doing it for a while and everything else. And she criticized the hell out of it for that. So that was what I heard in my ear as we went out to sell this and do a road trip, the executive producer, myself, to Los Angeles. So we went and we met with all these people, and they just thought we were batshit. They could not believe that we were wasting their time showing them this teaser of a home video. And we were literally at the time 10 years ahead of Blair Witch. So there was no reference for it. So I get it. But I remember having one woman say, "Get the hell out of my office. Don't come back here until you have a real movie." And so that was it. And had our last meeting after that, and drove back and going, well, we gave it a shot. Time to move on. And then we get a call from the last person we met with who said, "I'll take it." So we won the lottery. We're all excited, and first film getting distributed and everything. Haven't turned 25, made it, hit my goal, etc. And then I call and I check with him after sending him all the stuff, signed the deal. About a month later, 2 months later, and I said, "Hey, how's it going? How many pre-orders do we have?" And he said, "Oh, it's gone. It's burnt." And I said, "What do you mean it's burnt?" And he said, "It's burnt up, as in it's gone, fire, everything." And I said, I explained it to him. He says, "Well, our warehouse burned to the ground." So I lost my main master, all my artwork. I'm not saying the guy set his own warehouse on fire for insurance reasons, but wouldn't be the first time. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's where I thought it ended. So that was one of like 9 lives that this thing had. I'm going to open a drink because I forgot to open beforehand. So I'm being back. This isn't an alcoholic drink, but it's going to sound like I'm. Yeah.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's sparkling Waterloo. They're my sponsor. Great flavor.
I saw you put that cover on that can, but anyway. So it was gone, but now what happens after time goes by?
So what happens is nothing. 5 years go by, and I'm now doing crime reenactments on like the Stephen J. Cannell series and everything, and I get a call from some guy. His name is Sean David Morton, and Sean says, "Hey, your name has come up. We're trying to find who's got the rights to this footage that was found." And though he wasn't explicitly calling it found footage, that was the first time I had heard found footage. And I said, "Well, tell me about this." And he says, "Well, it's this family that gets abducted," and he's describing my film. And I said, "Yeah, that wasn't found. That's, we made that." And he said, "This isn't real." And I laughed and I said, "No, dude, it's not real. It's my first film." And, And he said, "Okay, do you know what's been going on for the past 5 years?" And that's when I said, "Dude, who the F are you?" And he says, "All right, I just came from the International UFO Congress Convention." This is 92, 93. He said, apparently, he says, "I think what happened was some mom and pop video stores got some advanced screeners of your film. And someone much more nefarious than I edited out the credits and injected into the UFO community. So it ends up at the International UFO Congress where ufologist Tom Dongo and retired Lieutenant Colonel Don Ware claim that it's authentic. And so Unsolved Mysteries now wants it hard copy, and this Fox show called Encounters. They want in on it. And I say to Sean, I go, "Well, it looks like we're down to 2 now because, Unsolved Mysteries." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, it's not called Solved Mysteries." And he goes, "We can get around that." And I go, "No, we can't." So I would go on Fox and I go ahead and they release it as this, big UFO, world's greatest UFO hoax stuff. And they put me on there. And so I figured I had my 15 minutes of fame with it. And it was really fun. And so I thought, well, that's it. Time to move on, which I did. And so that would be life number 2 or 3.
And so, but I think some of the funniest stories you've told me is that people were so convinced this was real found footage. I mean, they totally bought into it, and they would actually argue with you. Is that right?
Yeah, I would have ufologists call me from, now this is before the internet really, had a chance to take hold, from Brazil and from Japan. I think I know who some of these people were. I didn't know them at the time, but they would call and they would say, "I need to see this." And I would say, it's not real. I made it. I have pictures. I can show you. I'm the only filmmaker who works in the space that debunks their own stuff. I've got a small little niche. market going here. And they were insistent, send it to me. I don't care. Send it to me. I'm like, I'm not going to send it to you. It's going to cost me too much to send out. And I haven't made my money back on it yet. So I would argue with these people, and I would say, look, it's not real. And they would say, how do you explain the fact that my mother's sister's neighbor knows the McPherson's cousin? And I said, I cannot explain how your mother's sister's cousin knows the cousin of the McPhersons. I'll never be able to do that. So you just kind of, at some point, you make your case, and then you let people go with it or not. I mean, some people, it's kind of, a religion, and you just kind of, you let them know gently as possible that, hey, this is it. And it's also a cautionary tale for a lot of people. I mean, I'm a romantic. And so for me, whenever I see a UFO related story, I'm very timid. I don't kiss on the first date. You need to earn my love. So I need to go and I need to be wine and dine and see that this person, I need to check their taxes. I need to see their mother and go, okay, you're legit. I can now give myself to you 100%. But anyway.
Oh, and so this is a remastered version. And now I did want to ask you, you had some, at a distance, they're pretty realistic looking aliens and a spaceship. I couldn't quite figure out the spaceship. But, I don't want to give too much about the video away, but let's just touch on kind of what happens. It's a birthday party for a little girl.
Sure.
The power goes out. And, you want to just fill in a little bit of it. And then just to let everyone know, on YouTube, during people that are watching on YouTube, right before we head into the break, we're going to play the trailer. So you'll get to see the trailer of it. And it's going to be released on Amazon, right? Is that where it's?
Yeah.
And that's on the 28th.
April 28th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was I'll give you the synopsis of the story. The story, it starts out, this family, father passed away recently, and the youngest son bought this home video camera with his inheritance money, not wisely spent. And so his older brother is having his daughter's 5-year-old birthday party at the mother's house where this kid lives. And so they're all there, and it's a cabin out in the woods. And they see this light in the sky, and there's a blackout. They go out to investigate, and they see something that they did not expect out in their woods. And it kind of follows them back. And one by one, what hits the fan. And so that's kind of the setup for it. And the ship and aliens, our entire budget for that was $750. The guy who did it, Bill Bowes, very talented, went on to do the first Fantastic Four film. He worked with Tim Burton and the Scooby-Doo films. Very talented production designer. Wow. And
how much of
and
that?
Tommy,
how much of that $6,000 budget was that?
Was $750.
Oh, that was his entire budget was $750. Amazing.
$750.
Wow.
Yeah. And another $50, and we could have got the mouths to move. But I keep the budget. That's how I roll. So anyway, So what happened was this thing over the years, because apparently everything I do in 30 years has a 30-year ripening. It's like wine. It's going to take a while. So anything I do now, it won't be, I'll be however old. Anyway, I get a call from this guy from Alamo Drafthouse and AGFA, Bleeding Skull. That's an indie label that Alamo Drafthouse has, saying, we've tracked you down. When I was a kid, I watched this film. It scared the crap out of me. Do you know what's going on with your film? The second time I've heard this call before. And granted, in between that call, which was a year ago, and the first UFO abduction, I've remade it for UPN, which is not a very good version. This is an example of when you have more money, it does not make a better product. Yeah. $1.25 million.
Wow.
And we got the guys from the X-Files with the ship and aliens. No good. No.
Wow.
Anyway,
I bet it was more than $750.
Yeah,
a little bit.
And so this guy called. His name was Joe Zimba. He calls and he says, "Look, I love your film, and I want to show it at Fantastic Fest, which is the biggest genre film festival in the world, and I'd like to distribute it theatrically and get it released in theaters across the country. And so I don't know if I hung up on him or I think I listened to him, gave him a chance, and it just blew my mind. And he said, dude, you have no idea. This is a film that affected me, and there was a big market out there. There's a whole cult following. So I went last September or October to the screening, and we had a packed house, and Allie sat next to me, my girlfriend, and I said to her, I whispered to her, I said, there's a chance, because I've never seen this with an audience, there's a chance that this is going to go south because there's a lot of talking over each other. And so that was the last real review that I had. I mean, we had one screening, friends and family crew, in 88, 89. Yeah. That doesn't count. These people don't know me.
Yeah.
They're not going to go, home with me and buy me, a drink. And so so we sit next to the aisle, and then we're watching it, and I get it, that it has this nostalgia 80s vibe to it. It's very analog, and even the things, I mean, there's fun unintentional jokes in it, as well as jokes that were kind of landing, but mostly it was just this kind of fun experience going back in time and seeing this kind of rough and ready version of what it would be like. And again, the ship and the aliens and the abductions, everything was to the letter of the law of how it happens. So again, it was, a real opportunity for me as a budding ufologist to recreate something without getting probed.
And how did the audience like it?
They loved it. The Q&A was one of their longest Q&As after.
Wow.
And the questions were great. I said to them, I said, look, because I showed it at UFO Congress. And I said to them, is there anyone here that still believes, even after seeing, some of the behind the scenes shots and everything, that the movie is real and that I'm full of it? And like 3 people raised their hands in the back of the room. And I realized this is like COVID. You see those 3, but no, it's much worse than that. Much worse. So I'm figuring the whole, at least a third of that audience thinks that I'm full of it. So we show this, and I'm wondering if the same thing happens. And I said, is there anyone out here that still, thinks that? And I look over and I go, this guy over here, look at him. His arms are folded. He thinks I'm full of crap. Look at this guy. And then the guy who was moderating it says, do you think that he's full of it? And he says, I don't think it's funny the way that he's mocking, this real family, that this thing happened. And I said, what if I could get you to a place where you would firmly realize that this is real? And he goes, good luck. And I go, okay, come. So I brought him up on stage, and I had him pull out his wallet. And he reached in. I said, take your ID out. So he takes it out, and this is Tommy Giovacchini. And he's a lead actor in my film. So we kind of...
Oh, my God.
Forgot any of the screens or anything. So at that point, if there is anyone in the theater that still thought that it was real, it just kind of obliterated that fantasy.
That's funny.
So,
someone said in the chat room that it would be great if you had like a reunion of the cast at one of the conferences. That would be fun, huh?
I would love to do that. They were rock stars. I mean, they really, really brought it. Again, the spirit was not to fool anyone. It was 2 things. It was my need to get my first film done before this ridiculous age limit, and the second one was to pay homage to this phenomenon, and to recreate it in a way where people could see what that would be like and experience that. And then what happened beyond that was, divine intervention or alien intervention, depending on.
Yeah. Dean, so we are out of time. Where can someone find this?
They can find it on Amazon. Yeah. And it's now when I say it's, or you mentioned that it's been getting a new release, I went back to the original 8mm video tape copies, or VHS, whatever we shot on. I went back to the original because I had the originals. I had to rebuild it. Now, people had been ripping me off and posting my stuff online, so I had to rip them off in order to see the original cut before I shut them down. So this is the original. It's high end. I mean, it looks really good, cleaned up. And so they can go. There's a DVD and there's also a Blu-ray. It's the first time it's been done, and there's a whole bunch of fun bells and whistles, special effects, special features. So if I think you've got a link on that on your site.
Yes,
so
I do.
People can
It's
just
on the
click
site,
directly.
and I do believe it's on
The
YouTube as well.
McPherson Tape.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Dean. And I'll be talking to you real soon.
All right. Thank you, brother.
All right.
Be well.
Talk to you later.
And safe.
All right, everyone, hang in there. You people on YouTube, hang in there to watch this trailer. And over at KGRA Radio, we'll be right back right after these messages.
Clear.
Happy birthday to you. Wait, Michael, don't go yet.
Hold on. Oh, it's working. Forget it. Oh, you're going to break your neck today. I'm going to break your neck. Oh, shit. What the hell was that? Holy shit. What the hell is that? He's got him! He's shot one of them dead! It's right outside there!
Are you sure it's not back there?
It's not back there! I just took a look in there!
Get out!
All right, welcome back. My guest is Zelia Edgar. Welcome to the show, Zelia.
Hi, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's see. Steve Ward, who's actually been on this show, recommended you. He was at a conference you did. Was it on orbs? Is that what that was when you did that?
My presentation was on orbs, and that was at the Van Meter Visitor Festival last September.
Oh.
And that is an awesome festival, so highly recommended there.
Great.
And yeah, that's where I met Steve Ward. We're both very much into the work of John Keel, so he's an awesome researcher. Yeah.
John Keel. We actually have a blog on our website devoted to him. Very interesting person. But let's talk about you. What started your interest actually in this topic?
So the truth is, I've been interested in all of this, kind of weirder stuff, the paranormal, loosely for my entire life. I can't remember a time where it just wasn't something that was really intriguing to me. And I started really researching it when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And surprisingly enough, my intro to the field at large was actually cryptozoology. My mom really got me interested in Bigfoot and Sasquatch, actually. She remembered, growing up in the 70s, all of the, made-for-TV movies and stuff about Sasquatch. And so she thought at the time, she's like, oh, this is kind of fun, urban legend to, introduce Zelia to. And it's funny because then she started researching it. Now she does have a pretty major interest in Sasquatch as well. Obviously knows it's far more than an urban legend. And that was definitely my intro into this field. So from then on, I just, I went to the library and picked up every single book I could find on the topic. Surprisingly enough, one of John Keel's books, The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, was among them. And so that was one of my first books on the topic. And then when I was 10 years old, I actually met Linda Godfrey at a book signing. And that just totally changed my life because, here I actually met someone who was doing this work and was researching, of all things, werewolves in Wisconsin. Oh. And then, about a year later, I met Chad Lewis at one of his presentations. And, of course, he does the haunted road guides to different haunted locations and stuff like that. And it was just, those two people were really a profound influence on my life from that point on. So, yeah, since that time, I've been pretty much extensively researching the paranormal.
Did you say when you were 10 years old? Did I hear you say that?
Mm-hmm.
10 years old. Wow.
Yep.
So you really started young. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's really, that's really great that your mother actually was opening these type of very interesting topics that a lot of people think, they don't ever want to have their kid, think about or talk about, because of the, the ridicule you could possibly get, like if you talked about it at school or something like that. But no.
Oh, yeah, she's always been very supportive of my interests, and I know I'm very lucky to have that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And so what type of things did you get into? It was all types of paranormal, not just Bigfoot or UFOs, but you really looked at everything, right? And it's basically in Wisconsin or just all over?
Well, obviously, Wisconsin has a very strong history of weirdness. I love this state. I'm very fortunate to be here. So Wisconsin is probably a focus of mine, but it has definitely branched out to just, all over the place. And I started with a main interest in cryptozoology. And, for, I would say, a couple of years, that was pretty much all I was really, really interested in was cryptozoology. But then as time went on, I started looking into, like hauntings and then, of course, the UFO field. And now for years, I did look at that in a very, separate way that, UFOs are, extraterrestrials visiting Earth, and all cryptids are just some sort of undiscovered creature, ghosts are the spirits of the departed. But as time went on, I rediscovered Keel when I was 17 with Mothman Prophecies. And it was that was a huge turning point in how I started looking at the phenomenon. And so now I am kind of at this point where I'm seeing, the connections between these different types of phenomena, and that's what I'm very interested in now. So a very cohesive look at kind of every single different genre within the general field of the paranormal.
There are some people on. I had Paul Eno on this show, going on a year and a half ago, and he was, he kind of came up with this theory. I don't know if you've ever heard of Paul and Ben Eno. They do a show near right. I think it's in Massachusetts, right by Rhode Island, but they've been. I think they have like 600 or 700 shows that they've done together, and on various topics, but UFOs and ghosts and all that. He came up with this theory. He was explaining on the show that he thinks that they're all related. And is there any point in time that you've actually thought along those lines?
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of interesting because for some reason Sasquatch is actually the one holdout. Old habits die hard. That's the one thing where I'm really hoping that there is some sort of flesh and blood creature. But even with that, there's so many cases where you just can't fit it into that box of a physical flesh and blood corporeal animal. And so I am definitely of the opinion that there is a lot more in this field that's connected than there is not connected, if that makes sense. And I don't think that that's, there's just one answer to all of this either, even with the case of UFO phenomenon. I'm not entirely certain that it could possibly be any one particular thing, but I think that in a lot of these cases, there are definitely lines that can be drawn across these different fields.
Yeah. Well, some people will argue that they don't believe that UFOs are part of paranormal. They'll say it's not really paranormal because these are unidentified objects that are witnessed in the sky. And I still don't know what they are myself after all, doing this show now for how many years now? 2011, so close to 9 years, 8.5 years I've been doing this show. And I know probably less than I did when I started about what they are. But it is interesting, and I love hearing people's opinions of what they are looking at and thinking the possibilities are. But getting a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure if you hear that or not. Anyway, and what type of things, if you had to, I heard you say in another show, I listened to another show, ultra-terrestrial, and then you talked about Crypto-terrestrial or something like that.
Oh,
yeah.
Crypto-terrestrials, yeah.
Can you explain what that is exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the crypto-terrestrial theory I actually first encountered in Ivan Sanderson's book, Invisible Residents. And that book, too, Ivan Sanderson is another one of my favorite researchers. And that book really kind of propounded this idea that there is the potential for a race of beings to be coexisting on this planet and of this planet, just unbeknownst to us. And so he presents a line of reasoning in which the likeliest place would be that they might live in the deep oceans. And he also cites a lot. That book was mainly about USOs, so unidentified submerged objects. And that theory, I find that very interesting. I am, again, with all of these different ideas, I by no means think that they account for all of the sightings. But yeah, the crypto-terrestrial theory is definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, and but okay, as far as UFOs, are there? You did a talk on orbs, so I want to hear what you found out about orbs. And I know a lot of people. I mean, I actually was sent a photo from someone, and it was just dust. It's just the way the light hit it and the way the camera took the picture. It looks like an orb, but there's a lot of that, right? I mean, there's a lot of.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So why don't you kind of explain your thoughts on orbs in general.
Sure thing. I will go on the record here too and say that Chinese lanterns and dust motes are like two of the banes of my existence, because so many photos, it's dust motes, it's condensation. A lot of sightings of UFO type orbs, unfortunately, are Chinese lanterns. I hate those things.
Yeah.
But anyway, but no, true orbs are very interesting to me, and the really interesting thing to me about them is that they kind of are across every different field of the paranormal. So this is another one of those kind of connecting points for me in regards to all these different types of phenomena. Because not only are orbs one of the most commonly reported UFO type, I mean, if you go on Nightcap, it's a fireball or sphere type object. Those are the two highest categories for the most part, I believe. But they're also reported a lot of the times with other types of UFOs. People will see a craft, and then in the area there'll be other sightings of orbs, or they'll see orbs with a craft or preceding a craft or after the fact. But also orbs are observed in conjunction with cryptids, and of course there's a huge correlation to hauntings in orbs. And the thing that really struck me when I started doing this research is the fact that we're never really defining an orb as okay, it's a ghost orb, it's a UFO orb, as something that it itself is. We're kind of identifying it based on the situation around it. So if you see it in a house, it's a ghost orb. If you see it in a graveyard, it's a ghost orb. If you see it in the sky, it's a UFO orb. If you see it with a cryptid, people think you're crazy. And so that is the thing that really stood out to me. And I started to wonder if maybe there was more to it than that. We have this connection there with this one type of phenomenon, the orb phenomenon, across all these other unrelated types of phenomenon. So it's my opinion now that I do think that they are some type of energetic manifestation. And I think that really it's kind of evidence for the fact that across the board, UFOs, ghosts, and cryptids in many cases, there's some sort of energy that we simply don't understand about them. And that's what's kicking up this kind of subset of the phenomenon in the orbs.
Wow. Interesting. And, you think about, all the way back on the Foo Fighters back, during World War II.
Yeah.
Basically, people were, pilots were seeing these things off their wingtips, following, their flight patterns, and they didn't know what they were. They thought they might be the Japanese or the Germans or whatever. They had no idea what they were. But there has been a lot of orb sightings as UFOs. I never really thought about what you're saying about the different types of orbs that people see, but people do see them in houses. People see them in their backyards, and I don't know if you'd call that a UFO, but a lot of times they're just kind of small. I mean, they're not really, the size of a basketball or something like that. That's what you hear about it.
Yeah. In most cases, they are. Basketball size is probably the most common, I would say, especially outside. It's interesting, too, because I feel like, and this is the case with a lot of things in the paranormal, people really look at it as kind of an either-or type thing. Because the interesting thing with me for orbs is that then you do have ghost lights, where they make the appearance every night, every so many nights, time and time again. And again, a lot of those can be ruled out as headlights and stuff like that, but there are many cases that are still anomalous in regards to that specific type of that phenomenon. And the interesting thing to me is that, looking at that, what if this is some sort of, maybe there's a geomagnetic fault line or something that we simply don't understand that's causing this. That doesn't rule out that there is still a very strange connection when you see an orb with a cryptid or with a UFO or in a haunted location, by saying that some of them might simply be due to an electrical structure that we don't understand or an energetic structure that we don't understand that is natural. That's not ruling out that there are definitely strange, anomalous connections there, but it does kind of point to an idea that they would be a manifestation of energy. And that's what I really think is interesting about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good possibility. There was the Brown Mountain lights, for instance, where there was a lot of copper in the mountain there, and there was the orbs that people were seeing there. There's a number of cases, like that. I think there's the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts, in that area, where they see this. They can't explain it to this day, but above the railroad tracks, they see this orb, at a distance, and they've never been able to. No one's ever been able to track it down and to see what it actually is. And I know there have been, we always try to look for plausible reasons why we're seeing different things. There was some type of mountain where people were seeing these orbs, and ended up being headlights going up the, up the road, up the mountain. So there are a lot of situations like that where it can actually be explained. but I do believe that there is some type of energy. I've never seen one myself, so I can't say, from firsthand experience. But a lot of people report that they see these actually moving, and sometimes intelligently or seemingly so. Have you looked into that part of it? And when people say that, there's possible intelligence?
Yeah, there are a lot of definite, I would say, anomalous maneuvers performed by these orbs. One of the really interesting ones with the very famous, I believe it was the Joplin spook light potentially, was observed actually going around a telephone pole. And so a headlight reflection can't do that. And when they start maneuvering like that, that is something that's incredibly intriguing. I know there's a famous weird location in Wisconsin, the Devil's Punch Bowl, that, among other things, has sightings of gnomes. But there's an account there that multicolored lights actually moved into someone's car. So there are definitely some very anomalous things that these orbs are known to do. And then, too, a lot of people, some people tie them to abduction lore. Some people say that they've been able to see entities inside of them. I know there's a report from Skinwalker Ranch where someone claimed that they actually saw a figure inside of one of these things, almost like it was some sort of portal. So, I mean, again, there's definite outliers and definitely strange, like even stranger than the typical strange in this.
Yeah.
But
There was actually a woman, someone told me, no, this is secondhand, but someone that was on this show said a woman that he talked to told him his story. Now, this is just all stories right now, but basically it was like an orb, and out from the orb came Bigfoot. I mean, you can't beat that. That's all the bells and whistles right there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I had mentioned to you off air when at first that I have a friend listening from Wisconsin that never has listened to the show before, and I've known him for many years. He was interested to hear what's going on some of the cases in Wisconsin, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Some of the cases that you find fascinating that happened in Wisconsin.
Oh, sure thing. Wisconsin has a lot of just general weirdness, but especially UFOs. And I would say probably it may actually be my absolute favorite UFO contact case is the Simonton encounter. And this occurred in Eagle River in 1961, April 18th. Joe Simonton was sitting eating his breakfast. It was around 11 o'clock in the morning when all of a sudden he heard this weird noise outside, and he said that it kind of sounded like knobby tires on wet pavement. And so he looked outside, and what does he see but this luminous silver UFO? He said it looked like it was kind of like two bowls inverted with these weird little like pipes around it. So it's hovering over his backyard. So he goes outside, and he walks up to it, and this opening appears on the side of it. And he looks inside, and he says that he sees three men who look like very short Italian men. And they're wearing black turtleneck suits and little black knit caps. And one of them is at the opening. He said that he got the vibe that one was like the leader. It had red trim on the pants. That was the only thing that distinguished it from the other ones. And it handed him a little silver object, a container of some sort, that looked like it was made out of the same material as the saucer itself. And somehow he got the impression, and I've listened to an interview with Simonton, and I have a lot of papers on this. He got the impression, and he never said if it was telepathically or body language or what, that they needed water. So, and I just love how this is very Wisconsin weird. He's just like, oh, okay, sure thing, man. Let me go get you some water. So he goes into the house, he gets the water, he comes back out, and then he notices that one of these occupants is standing at what looks like a flameless grill, making some sort of food. And this is what takes this case, as of right now, it's already weird enough, but it just takes it to the next level of weirdness. So Simonton hands over the water, and he kind of motions like, hey, what are you guys doing? Well, apparently the leader entity took that as he wanted a sample of some sort. So he gave Simonton 3 of these pancake-like objects. And again, I love this case. It's probably my favorite contact case ever. So Simonton kept the pancakes. The thing took off. Apparently it bowed one of the nearby pine trees. And this case was actually investigated by Project Blue Book. And it's really an amazing case. So Simonton kept the pancakes. He actually tasted one of them. He said that it tasted like cardboard. I mean, that takes some level of courage, though, to taste an alien pancake. There was a sample that was sent to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to try and ascertain exactly what they were composed of. And here's what really, this is a thing that's very interesting to me about a lot of cases of artifacts given to people from UFO occupants. The pancake came back that it was completely made out of terrestrial materials. It was mainly buckwheat hulls and something like Crisco, I believe. But there was, yeah.
Maybe they stopped at a convenience store first. You never know, what I mean? Yeah.
Exactly. They were in the neighborhood, so they just picked up some Crisco and buckwheat, and we're good. There was an absent. Yeah, it's awesome, just totally awesome. And so the thing here is that pretty much everyone then absolutely dropped the case, because on the one hand, you have the skeptics who are like, okay, well, it was terrestrial materials, so obviously he made it up. As to why he would make such hideous pancakes, if you ever see pictures of what they do, they look just like awful. They look horrible. As to why he would go to those lengths to make this up. Yeah. And, he regretted his decision to come forward for the rest of his life. Oh. I have no idea. But then on the flip side, a lot of even the ufologists, it's already hard enough to appear to be professional going about the business of investigating UFOs. And so as soon as there was room for anyone to be like, well, he made it up, absolutely dropped the case as well. But I think that the intriguing thing to me about it is that you get this a lot in artifact cases where the artifact in question, what does a witness want more than anything when they see a UFO or experience something that, no one's going to believe them? They want some sort of proof. And in many of these cases, unfortunately, the proof which is given and promised turns out to be a very mundane, simple object. I know Keel referred to it as the artifact game in Operation Trojan Horse. And so I think that with this case, though, there's a huge tradition throughout fairy lore, and this was really pointed out by Jacques Vallée in Passport to Magonia, regarding flatbreads and pancakes. I mean, a lot of cases of fairy contact, and even in demonology, there's cases of contact that way, involve flatbreads for some crazy reason. And so if you look at this case kind of more symbolically and folklorically, you suddenly do kind of have a connection. There's also a really weird thing. The pancakes were absolutely devoid of any form of salt. And this ties in, too, to fairy lore, where apparently the fairies are unable to tolerate salt in any of their foods. So it's a very, very bizarre case. Really interesting.
Yeah. What are some other ones? I can't say as I know of any in Wisconsin. What are some of the other ones that, does Wisconsin have a Roswell? A famous case that a lot of people talk about, because I can't think of one in particular.
We do have 3 of the UFO capitals of the world, so self-proclaimed, of course. And one of them, oh gosh, I'm getting dyslexia with this. I believe it was, was that one? Can't remember if that was, I think it was Long Lake, potentially. I sometimes have a horrible time remembering places and dates and stuff. Had a really interesting case where one particular man, Officer Wheeler, actually had 2 pretty intense sightings of UFOs. The first one occurred in the 70s, and he saw a huge ball of fire, is how he described it. And that case is interesting enough. But then a year later, almost a year exactly, he actually had another encounter where he saw, again, this kind of far-off light. He thought that there was a fire. And so he drove out to this location. It was Tuttle Hill, and it's right next to a quarry. And all of a sudden, he came into contact with a huge craft. And he has a very detailed description of it, drew a picture of it and everything, and with blue and white lights. But the really intriguing part is that then he actually was struck unconscious. And was discovered later in his police cruiser, just totally knocked out. Oh. So, yeah, that's a very significant encounter, I would say.
Yeah, and as far as other ones of note, if you just want to go through a few of those, because these are all ones I've never heard of so far.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, except for the pancakes. I've heard about the pancakes. I always thought that was in, I don't know why, but I thought that was in the desert or something like that. I pictured, and for some reason, when I had heard that story before, that they were actually like in a cave or something, but that's not true. It was always on the craft.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah.
I know that there is there's actually a connection to the Icelandic elves. That's a big deal, where a woman actually claims that she swapped pancakes with them as well. That was fairly recently. So
wow.
don't ask me what's up with all the pancakes.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so are there other Wisconsin cases? How about, I'm just trying to think. No, that wasn't Wisconsin. So I'd like to hear, you were actually involved in MUFON there, right?
Yes, I was. Yeah, and I was a certified field investigator and then state director for a time. And the interesting thing is that a lot of the cases that I investigated were kind of in line with the orb or light ball phenomenon. I'd say that's probably one of the most predominant type of sightings we have around here, are of orbs. And some people actually tie that to the Great Lakes. A lot of these sightings occur either near the lakes, or people even see the lights going in and out of the lakes. So that is definitely a connection, I would say. It's really interesting too.
Yeah. There are a lot of people that claim there are abductions in Wisconsin as well. Do you ever hear about that?
I would say so. I believe, the UFO capitals of the world, I think it was Long Lake, actually. There is a statement that a lot of people at the time, there was a huge UFO flap, claimed that they were being abducted. And I can't find really that many details on that. I know when I was with MUFON, there were a few cases of abduction that I was aware of. I was never directly involved with those. So...
and for the new listener out there, a lot of people don't even, that are brand new, don't even know what MUFON is. It's the Mutual UFO Network. I think it's the oldest existing network for UFO, reporting, basically, if someone wants to report a UFO. And you said you were state director for a short time.
Yep.
And what did you leave because of kind of what happened a number of years ago, controversially, or?
It's an interesting organization. I will say that a lot of the researchers that I came into contact with, a lot of the field investigators I came into contact with, are definitely in it for the right reason.
Yes.
And are doing really good work.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any organization I feel like that is involved with this, you're always going to kind of have the, conspiracy angle of it. And it was interesting being a part of MUFON. For me, the main reason I left was due to the workload. Wisconsin, at the time that I was state director, had only 4 or 5 field investigators, including myself.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, sometimes it would be totally fine. Typically we wouldn't get very many cases on a week-to-week basis, but then all of a sudden there'd be a week where you would have a dozen cases. And so, that was definitely kind of part of why I left. And also, too, I just, was kind of making my own way in this research. Like I said, I've moved towards a way more cohesive look at it. And that was kind of the angle I wanted to focus on, was this kind of cross-genre research. So, I just decided to start focusing more on that.
Yeah. So if you could explain for a listener that doesn't really understand how this works, a report comes into MUFON, and then it basically doesn't come into the state, though, does it? It comes in to MUFON itself, and then it's sent out from there.
Yep, so...
Go ahead.
Yep, it goes into MUFON, and then from there it is kind of sorted out into state by state, and then the state director is the first person after that point to get the report, from which point then it's assigned to an investigator. So... And that was the coolest part about MUFON, was being able to, have access to those cases and being able to talk to witnesses. I really, really loved that angle of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, too, because, again, I've been researching this whole thing for a very long time. So I kind of, not that I've lost the, oh, wow, this is crazy sort of vibe, but to deal with someone who has seen something that really, kind of rocked their world, and you're the first person they're reaching out to talk about it.
Yeah.
That was something that... I wasn't prepared for. I mean, it was amazing to be able to talk to someone who's I have no one else to talk to. I just want to know what this was.
Yeah.
And so that gave me a huge appreciation for the phenomenon itself, and also for people who report. I would really advise, if you do see something, absolutely report it to somebody at least. Because most sightings go unreported. I mean, I think that it's a really low percentage, probably about 20%, that ever gets reported. Yeah. And of course, that's all that researchers have to go on.
Right.
So.
Right, and there could be some corroborating witnesses that would really help a lot. That never reported. When I had a sighting back in 2006, and I I always get the year confused. It was 2006 or 2007. I can't really remember for sure. But it never even crossed my mind to look on the internet to report it.
Oh.
Never crossed my
Yeah.
mind. It just like I called the police department because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. And do you think that that right now, if someone never thought about a UFO and they saw a UFO, that they would think to go online? I mean, I don't know myself.
I think for the majority of people, I would guess probably not. I do think that, UFOs are kind of coming to the forefront, I would say, of pop culture. So I think that probably is helping a little bit to make people just more aware, of the phenomenon itself. I'm sure that it probably is maybe around 30% where they first thought is, oh, I should report this to somebody. Probably a lot less, actually.
Right. Have you yourself ever had any personal experiences with encounters?
Yes. I have been lucky enough to have several different UFO experiences. And the first one actually was with an orb-type UFO. Of course, I'm, basing that observation on the fact that it was in the sky. So, and this was a really intriguing case. This was in March of 2012, I believe. And there were 5 other witnesses involved. We saw these, they were about basketball-sized, glowing orange-ish, amberish objects, perfectly spherical, this perfectly kind of even glow. And they were only about 2 or 3 stories up in the air. And they were just kind of floating. I live actually at an intersection, so they were floating directly over the crossroads. There were 4 of these objects moving in a perfectly fixed kind of parallelogram formation. And it was just amazing to see them because there was absolutely no craft behind them. There was nothing tying them together. They were just these 4 perfectly fixed orbs of light moving all together in this amazing formation. And then slowly, one by one, they just started blinking rhythmically, and then they blinked faster, and then they were just absolutely gone. And it was an amazing sighting in and of itself. But my favorite part about this is actually the fact that, we're standing there. I was with my family at the time. We're watching these things and seeing, after they were gone, even just kind of looking to see what else might be going on. All of a sudden, this neighbor boy who lives across the street comes tearing through our yard. And he just runs through our yard, across the street, into his house and slams the door. And so, of course, I'm like, oh, he obviously saw him. So we all walked over, knocked on the door. We're like, hey, did you happen to see that, those things in the sky? And he was like, no, you guys don't get it. I was at the school playground that's some blocks away. It's like, these things came over twice. So apparently he was at this playground and he saw the same, the 4 orb-like objects move over, and he was like, okay, well, they're gone. And then they came over again, and that's when he just absolutely panicked and decided to run home. And this case was really just, it's hard to explain how amazing it really was to see these just perfectly spherical glowing objects. They were not Chinese lanterns at all. When they blinked out, there was nothing left. And they were right kind of between the power lines, just over the street. And yeah, it was just simply amazing. So that was probably my most dramatic experience with UFOs, if that makes sense. There was another time where I was watching a lunar eclipse, and this was some years ago. And all along the horizon, you could kind of see, the best description I have of them is these almost bioluminescent type objects. Just really, you could only see the outlines with this bizarre electrical bioluminescent type sheen kind of darting along the horizon. And so that was very interesting as well. So, and then a few times I've seen meandering nocturnal lights and things like that.
Yeah. I like to claim that I only had one sighting that actually got me interested and started me doing the show, but I did have something else. But I just don't. I don't feel comfortable enough to say that I had another UFO sighting. That's how I feel about that one. It was. I thought I was looking at the International Space Station. I don't know. I was walking on a golf course, but it looked like it did a jag, and that's what really threw me off. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was something atmospheric or something like that. But it wasn't a satellite. It was really big and very, very bright. So I really do think it was probably the International Space Station. But I just don't. I can't explain why it kind of jagged over a little bit. Again, atmospheric. I'm guessing. So I only have one UFO sighting, but I will tell you that it has changed a lot of things in my life. I mean, I love doing this show, first of all. I think it's fascinating. But also, I'm always looking in the sky. I never did that before. You know, I always like to look up at the stars and things like that, but now I'm looking. And and it makes me wonder how many people out there never look. You know, I mean, something could go right over their head, and they never look.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So let's get back into let's go a little bit off topic, and because I know that you looked into this. It was early 1900s. And it was some type of people were seeing this 9-foot tall creature, and there was some type of connection. Let's talk a little bit about that. I heard you talk about that on another.
Oh,
show.
sure.
Yeah.
The Fan Meter Visitor.
Yeah, that's it.
From Fan Meter. Okay, yeah. I loved that case, and that was it was really brought to life by Chad Lewis, Noah Voss, and Kevin Nelson on Backroads Lore Crew, and it's an amazing case because it was 1903, late September to early October, when the small town of Van Meter, Iowa, which is like 20 minutes away from Des Moines, I would say, started seeing this bizarre 9-foot tall winged entity. And it's a 9-foot tall winged entity. It's very bizarre. But it gets even weirder because, like, not only do you have a lot of prominent citizens seeing this thing, but you also there were sightings of things in the sky at the time as well. People were seeing bizarre lights in the sky and things like that. And, at the time, they were trying to figure out what this thing could possibly be. Someone propounded that it was some sort of antediluvian beast, like a prehistoric, almost pterosaur come to life. And it really is, it's another one of those cases where for 5 days this thing was showing up, people were seeing it. As a matter of fact, the bank manager, because when it started, and people were seeing the lights in the sky, he actually thought, well, maybe this is someone trying to break into the bank. So he would sleep in the bank while this was going on.
Wow.
He actually saw the thing and shot out the windows of the bank after it. So, I mean, this is how seriously people were taking this entity. There was another case where a man, this thing supposedly it was like this 9-foot tall winged entity, and it had a horn which projected some sort of light, which again is very weird. You see this a lot with different types of paranormal entities where they are luminous or have some sort of, light surrounding them. In one particular case, the beast kind of exuded some sort of mist, and the man who observed it had no recollection of what happened for the rest of the night. And, it's just weird how it ends, too, because apparently the whole town, it kind of is like some sort of like Frankenstein movie. The whole town got together and organized a posse, and they're going to try and get this thing, either kill it or chase it out of town. And the last time it was spotted was going into this mine. And from then on, I think there have been a few solitary cases in the years that followed. But, nothing like those 5 days in 1903. And the really interesting thing about this is the interesting thing about a lot of these, cryptid accounts. You'll have something show up for a span of a couple days or, a couple weeks. In the case of the Mothman, which is probably the longest, 13 months. And then the activity just absolutely drops off. And if this was some sort of creature, if it was, a population then of creatures, you would assume that it would be in the area, past that point. But instead, you just have this bizarre flare-up and then silence.
Yeah.
So
That seems to happen quite frequently. Not all the time, but a lot of times you will hear about, not necessarily flap, but something like, will show up for a short time and then never again. Well, like Mothman in, where it originated. I know, in the Chicago area, there's some type of strange continuing information. Just one thing back on this case back in 1903, and just playing devil's advocate, do you happen to know if there was any, I think of sometimes things being influenced by pop culture. Was there any books or anything out at that point that, sort of talked about a monster? Has anyone ever talked about anything like that? Because a lot of times someone will at least look to that and say, well, this is how this manifested. People were reading this book. Has anyone ever thought of looking into anything like that, about that case in particular that you know of?
I'm not sure if anyone has really particularly looked at that connection. I know that time frame of late 1800s, early 1900s, you do have kind of the birth of science fiction around that time. So I'm trying to remember when, like, The Lost World and all that stuff was published. So, I mean, those thoughts were, I would say, in the public mind, especially about prehistoric or antediluvian beasts. As to whether that is enough to, garner that response from professional, upstanding individuals in a community, I don't think so.
Yeah.
The thing that does intrigue me about that is that I do think that the phenomenon, this is, again, something very much that Keel was into, possesses a sort of reflective or reflexive quality sometimes. And so it appears to me, at least, that in a lot of these cases, the phenomenon will almost reflect the predominant interests or beliefs of that era. So I think if there is a connection, we're probably still dealing with an anomaly, just one that reflected that interest of that time.
Yeah.
So.
And what other is there talk about other cryptid type sightings in Wisconsin? Is there ever talk about Bigfoot or anything like that in Wisconsin?
Oh yeah, Wisconsin has quite the monstrous history. Bigfoot is definitely a presence here. Probably, I would say the thing that is kind of iconic for Wisconsin is the man-wolf. And again, that has a lot to do with Linda Godfrey's research on specifically the Beast of Bray Road, which happened in 1991 in Elkhorn. So yeah, we do have quite a few different monsters. Man-wolves are again, very iconic to the state. We also have lots of different lake monsters and things like that.
Really?
And, oh yeah.
People are seeing lake monsters there. Is that right?
Yeah, not so much recently. Lake monsters are another thing that seems almost firmly rooted in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. So there will still be, cases every now and again, sightings every now and again. But really the huge time for this was the late 1800s. And we do have a lot of different lakes that fall into that pattern, I would say.
Yeah. The thing about it's another thing similar to what we talked about earlier. People will see these things for a short period of time, like the Loch Ness Monster, the most famous one of them all. And they've tried everything to try to find something there, and it's just not happening. So it makes you wonder if first of all, if there's anything to it, you have to think that way. And then, but all the stories you hear, there's Champy at Lake Champlain. Do they have names, the ones that out your way?
Oh yeah, we have Jenny in Lake Geneva, Peppy in Lake Pepin, Bozo, I think that's Lake Mendota. Yeah, so there's a lot of these really cute names. I mean, they're absolutely adorable. And yeah, that's the thing that really, I feel like actually lake monsters may have been one of the first bricks to fall out in the wall of like the flesh and blood cryptozoologist in me. Because, yes, a lake can be very large, it can be very difficult to search, but ultimately it's pretty much a closed ecosystem. So if you're looking for a giant serpent, it started to make less and less sense to me that you're only seeing it every couple of years, or there was just honestly a lake monster flap that occurred in the late 1800s. If you're looking at that from the flesh and blood standpoint, if there's one animal, you have to have a whole population of them. And lake monsters, that's really kind of what drove that point home for me. Because you would just think that if there was a population of these, large creatures, we would be seeing them, more often. We'd be seeing them more consistently, or we'd be able to find them at all, and that just simply isn't the case.
Well, that's the same with all the cryptids. If you really think about it, never any skeletal remains, and elusive. It just seems I can't think of any of the so-called cryptids as far as Bigfoot all the way down that I've ever heard of, where there's never been any so-called evidence. I mean, there was a time where they thought they had some hair, and after DNA tests, it ended up, I believe, it ended up being bear. I'm not really sure if they've ever really cracked that. I know one person claimed that they did, but I can't remember.
I think there have been a few anomalous hair samples that do fall into primate, but not quite anything that we have. But that's also the issue, is until you have something that you can measure them against, until you do have the body, if there is a body, you're not going to be able to say, well, this is Sasquatch hair. And that's just, that's the unfortunate thing about that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned your mother was really into this type of thing. Has she ever really looked into it deeply, or is it just kind of topical for her?
She's actually getting more, I mean, it's one of those things where she was a stay-at-home mom. I've got two little sisters, and now that we're all, pretty much grown, my youngest sister's 17, she's looking at what she wants to do again. And so, before this, she worked with the DNR as a field archaeologist. And, now that she's hit this point where she can she doesn't need to focus on taking care of us. She's definitely looking to get more involved in this field in particular. So, I mean, and she's kept up, she's interested in, everything that I do. So that's awesome. And she's kept up too on her own research, I would say. She is very interested in it. So before this whole, quarantine thing, not to bring up kind of a bummer topic, she was actually looking at the BFRO expeditions and stuff like that. So. Yeah,
there's a lot of changes we're all doing at this point. All right. So you mentioned earlier that there was some USO encounters. Is that in Wisconsin that you were talking about in particular?
I know that a lot of people have seen objects going into and coming out of the lakes. Lake Michigan is what I'm probably most familiar with, and there have been accounts of people seeing things in the lake or coming out of the lake, or especially right near the lake. So I would say that's a part of the phenomenon here.
What is? I'm sorry. Someone just sent me a text. They wanted me to ask you something. So go ahead.
Oh, sure
I'm
thing.
Sorry.
Oh, totally fine. No, people do observe things coming into or coming out of the lakes, especially Lake Michigan. That's the one I'm probably most familiar with, closest to it. Yeah. So I think for the most part, there have been, I'd say it's a blend of craft type objects and the more soft sightings of luminous objects and light ball phenomenon.
Yeah. And those lakes are very deep and unexplored. Someone wanted me to ask you about UFOs as entities.
So biological UFOs.
Yeah.
That is something I'm very interested in. And again, Ivan T. Sanderson was the first researcher that really introduced me to this concept that in some cases, I think that we do a lot of times, it just fits the current model of our society, that we look at UFOs as craft. We look at it as some sort of vehicle. But the interesting thing is that a lot of cases kind of don't really fall into that category. And I know recently people have been seeing, they call them either sky mantas or flying jellyfish. That's kind of the biggest, I think that's probably one of the newest trends in UFO sightings. And so, the concept is that there may be some sightings which are, the object in question is a living entity of its own accord. And that's something I'm really interested in. Ivan Sanderson in Uninvited Visitors, that was an awesome book. He even went so far, I love Ivan Sanderson because he wasn't afraid to go to the furthest bounds where whatever line of reasoning he was on would take him. And in Uninvited Visitors, he even went so far as to suggest that possibly, an extraterrestrial race may have figured out how to engineer giant amoeba-like organisms into vehicles which could then bring them here. Now, I don't know if I subscribe to that theory, but I do think that there's a pretty strong branch of sightings that falls into a category that I would describe as organic. And that is a personal encounter that I had was, the bioluminescent looking things. And the way that they moved and the way that they looked, it wasn't what I would describe as your typical UFO craft. It wasn't geometric or anything like that. It was definitely a lot more organic. I think that the really interesting thing too that this might correlate to is actually angel hair. I remember seeing that actually when I was a kid, and it was just a beautiful summer day, I think in probably 2002, if I'm remembering right. Again, I was a kid. And I was on a walk with my mom and some other family members. All of a sudden, this stuff starts drifting out of the sky. And, there is a lot of misidentified accounts where it is just balloon spiders and stuff like that. But then there are these really anomalous accounts where it is just, something that we really can't identify. And it's something that's always been what is that? To me, it was always kind of indefinable, especially when I was going at this from ghosts, cryptids, and UFOs. Angel hair was always kind of just floating around, quite literally, and I didn't really know what to make of it. And I think that if you, bring up this concept of biological UFOs, I could kind of see where that might tie into that it might be, either, actual like body parts of these things, if we're like thinking about them almost as like a lot of descriptions are of almost giant jellyfish-like type entities, or something like that, or possibly even like some sort of discharge that they have. I don't know, but because it's very, I don't think any actual samples have ever been taken of it, because any attempt to gather this angel hair, it just absolutely evaporates.
Well, no,
So-
there was a case where a woman had a UFO encounter, and it was on the trees, and they did take samples. I don't remember. This is something I've talked about on the show with someone, a number of years ago. But I do remember that, and I think you could probably do some research on that. But I don't know whatever became of the samples. But it was actually, filtered down on the trees after a sighting that she had.
I'd be very interested to hear about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a guest on the show that actually said that, she claims that she was actually abducted, and that she felt like the craft that she was on was biological. She said, I don't know how I knew, but I felt as though it was something living, which is bizarre. I've been kind of on the fence about that a lot of times about, abductions and things like that. But it was still, again, it's still interesting to hear about,
The line between living organisms and non-living organisms in the UFO phenomenon is very interesting, because then, of course, too, you have the abductees who claim that the actual entities that they came into contact with didn't feel like they were alive, like they were drones or something.
Yeah.
So it is interesting how there's kind of like, things that should feel alive, should feel sentient, don't, and things that shouldn't do. It's very interesting.
Yeah. I found out just before this show, I don't know if I actually spoke to you about this, but just before the show, we found out that the phone system is actually down at KGRA. But I would like to offer our phone number out there for Skype. It's just a little clunky, no screener. So you're going to go in live if you call. But let me get that number up here in just a minute. And for people over at KGRA, that number is 603-967-4030. I'm the one who's going to be answering the call. You'll go into the show live. So again, that number is 603-967-4030. And I'll put that right up on the screen as well, if anyone would like to call in and ask our guest some questions. So where have you ever thought of actually doing any writing on this subject yourself?
Oh yes, that's kind of a long-term goal of mine, is writing a book on it. I'm thinking, I'm just so interested in all these different aspects that pinning down what I want to start with is probably going to be the trickiest thing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I will tell you, I know there is someone that writes a book, basically UFOs over LA, UFOs over such and such. I don't believe there's anyone's ever written UFOs over Wisconsin. So there you go.
there is UFO Wisconsin by Noah Voss, which is pretty great, but
Oh, there is? There actually is a book?
There is just one, yeah. But
Oh, well, there goes that one.
There's always more UFO sightings, so,
Yeah, well,
But,
I never knew that existed. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, absolutely
Silly me.
fine. I'm toying with the idea of writing on actually UFO occupant clothing is kind of my current research project. So, because that's something that really is intriguing to me.
I don't think anybody has ever really touched that subject. There's interesting accounts going, for instance, in the blog that we have, the Socorro incident, they look like little children in little white coveralls, and a lot of people talk about, well, you must have looked into this. What are some of the different things that people are saying that they're actually seeing when they see a being?
Well, what really started this whole line of reasoning for me was actually the Flatwoods Monster. And there's a lot of different theories as to what that could potentially be. But if you look at it as, possibly some sort of entity, it was seen with a crashed UFO. What stood out to me is that this is exactly what we should be expecting, is some sort of very robotic or drone-type entity. And, because if we're looking at these things as extraterrestrial biological beings, no matter how advanced their technology is, it just really doesn't follow that they would come unprotected, unprepared. I would be expecting to see, like hazmat suits, space suits, things like that. But instead, we really don't see that very often. Every now and again, I know that the diving suit type description, that was big for quite some time, especially in like the 50s to the 60s and 70s, I feel like. But a lot of the times these entities are observed in things like coveralls, or like in the Simonton encounter. I mean, turtleneck suits and little knit caps. You know, you see a lot of descriptions too that correlate to the older fairy lore, specifically little caps, tunics, things like that, shining material. And so it's just intriguing to me that really this can't really neatly fit the idea that these are entities from another planet. Because most of the time in a lot of these encounters, there's no type of visible protection, there's no breathing apparatus or anything like that. So that's something interesting to me. And then too, kind of the segue that opens up is, what could it possibly mean? You know, I feel like in a lot of these cases, there's almost a symbolic aspect to what's being presented. And that's what I'd really like to try and figure out.
Yeah, you know, we had a conversation, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago on this show about, you know, one of the things I brought up is it's like in Independence Day or other movies where there's a virus. You know, here we are now with this virus that we're dealing with. But we have many immunities to thousands of viruses in our body that we're used to. And if a being goes into a new atmosphere, you know, they're asking for trouble. I mean, look what happened when the, you know, Europeans, you know, went to Mexico and millions of people died because they were not immune to the diseases they carried.
Exactly.
So that is always a puzzle. Maybe they're not actually breathing. Who knows? Or they have some type of protection. But what are is there, when you looked into this, is there a more common garb that they wear? You know, I mean, is it a lot of times you hear tight-fitting, you know, type of suits or something like that people are claiming they see?
Yeah, I would say just on the face of it, some sort of coverall is probably the most common. And, you know, that brings up other intriguing things because a lot of the, you know, Men in Black encounters, some of those kind of, you know, and again, some of the Men in Black instances may have been government authorities or something like that, but some of the weird ones even describe these entities as wearing coveralls. So kind of a cross, because then too, this brings in the funny concept of the different types of entities. You know, are they humanoid? Are they not exactly humanoid? But I would say that across the board, the coverall type outfit is probably the most common. And it does, I feel like it does kind of, there's almost trends with it and things that shift, you know, kind of as our culture shifts. And so again, I think that there is some sort of reflective nature to a lot of these different types of paranormal phenomenon. Yeah.
You know, one of the things I think about is, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but are people never talk about when they claim they see grays, you know, gray aliens or whatever they are. They're not dressed, are they? I mean,
for the most part, they're usually described as, having no clothing. And that's another weird thing too, because another really common description that you see with that is that people almost feel like the gray is the outfit. Which must be very unsettling for people who are experiencing something already very out of the ordinary, to then be presented with, you know, this entity which is by all accounts some sort of living creature. They get the feeling that it really isn't. And again, that kind of goes into the non-sentient question that we talked about.
Yeah.
So,
like no emotion or something like that. But, you know, I know if you looked into the Pascagoula incident a little bit, and Calvin Parker's actually, I'm in touch with him all the time. He's a great guy, and he kind of his experience was that, you know, one, he said, seemed like the female and seemed, you know, like personable sort of, and the other seemed like, you know, a drone, like a bee drone or something, like they were just doing their thing. That's a bizarre case.
You see that a lot, I would say, and, you know, it even gets more interesting when some of these fall into, again, the very old fairy lore. The fairy queen kind of makes an appearance in some of these abduction cases, where there is a tall, typically feminine entity that stands apart from the drones that are doing the work. And that goes back to very old traditions, where you have kind of more impish goblin type creatures, and then this beautiful fairy queen. And, you know, on the face of it, that just really, you know, it's very confusing. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And those are the things that just really stand out are incredibly interesting to me.
Yeah. It almost seems that when you talk about it that way, it almost seems like the whole thing could be folklore. However, Calvin and I think that case has an extreme amount of merit. From basically from when they were recorded at the police station when they didn't know they were being recorded. I think that's probably the most solidifying part of that case. When they were talking
it is
between the two of them.
Yeah, it's just two people trying to rationalize something that really, I'm not going to say it's impossible to rationalize, but it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's the interesting thing too. Is I feel like there are definite folkloric strains that run through this phenomenon. That isn't to say that it didn't happen, or that it doesn't have a reality. I think that there's a very real phenomenon occurring across all the paranormal, and probably a bunch of different types of phenomena that are occurring. And it's interesting to see when their patternings kind of reflect these folkloric strains that we have in our culture.
Yeah. That's one of the things I know that you did a little bit of a talk on, which is totally out of the UFO field. And we're still, anyone can call in. That number again is 603-967-4030. And that was the Peshtigo fire, the fire.
Oh, the Peshtigo fire. Yeah.
How do you pronounce that? I'm sorry, I just read it. Yeah.
Absolutely fine. Peshtigo.
Peshtigo fire.
Peshtigo.
Yeah. So not too many people know about that. They know about the Chicago fire. This happened basically. There's been a lot of speculation over the last several years. I know this is totally off the UFO topic, but I find it fascinating. It wasn't the cow that tipped over the lantern. Something else was going on. So can you explain what that fire was exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. The Peshtigo fire, actually, it occurred on the exact same day. It was all part of a series of fires that were occurring across the Midwest and the Great Lakes region on the same date as the Chicago fire. And the truth is that, even in Wisconsin, I would say a lot of people absolutely don't know about it. And the interesting thing is that about 4 times as many people died in the Peshtigo fire alone as in Chicago. But Chicago, of course, is what's remembered. And yeah, it's just, there's a lot of just, it's still not entirely sure exactly what started these fires. And there are, many explanations which could have been natural. At the same time, there's also a lot of weirdness that was occurring at the time. Apparently, there are some eyewitness accounts from the Peshtigo fire of great fireballs in the sky at the time, of course, before we really understood the nature of comets, because this occurred in 1871. People actually chalked it up to a comet or meteor starting this fire as it passed too close to the Earth. So there is definitely room for something anomalous to have happened. As to whether that is the case definitively, I'm not sure. But yeah, with Peshtigo too, there's a lot of weird stuff too with places that didn't burn. Apparently there was a chapel that was completely untouched and things like that. So
and was that a city actually?
It was near Green Bay actually. So it was very rural, and the fact then that, the actual death count is not entirely known, but it was somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500 people. So the fact that there were that many deaths, it was just absolutely decimated. And yeah, it's very much, I would say, unknown, even in Wisconsin, because, the Chicago fire and the cow kicking over the lantern, that's definitely what people think of. And then too, I think there were even some fires occurring in Michigan in that same day as well.
I actually heard that it went all the way up to Canada. I don't know if you ever heard about that or not. But
I know Michigan.
Yeah. And, it's... and a meteorite is not going to start a fire, as far as I know. I've never heard of that happening at all. They burn out. Usually when they hit, they're not burning at that time. I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong, maybe. But I wonder if they're ever going to figure that out, because I know there's a lot of people looking into it. I read something only 2 years ago about it or so. Something on those.
Well, I know. Yeah, the meteorite thing I really don't think is entirely plausible, especially because, survivors of the Peshtigo fire actually claimed that it felt like the air was just incinerating people. There was even an account that a family tried to escape by getting all of their, blankets and sheets and stuff wet in the river and then lying in a field, because, of course, the people who went into the river, many of them actually died from hypothermia. It was just a horrible tragedy. But this family, got their blankets and things in the river, and then laid in the field, thinking that they could kind of just survive like that. And an eyewitness account claimed that it looked like this fireball actually directed itself at them, and they burst into flame. So again, it's a very weird, very tragic thing that happened.
Yeah. I just tried to join a call. Caller, are you on the line? Didn't come through. Okay. So, caller, are you there? Okay. I would just say if you're listening, I'm sure you are, try to call in. I'll try to join you to the call again. So our call screening and all that should be up next week, hopefully. And again, that number is 603-967-4030. Have you also, you said, you have read Jacques Vallée, I'm sure, if you've read about UFOs in general. Is he up there as far as one of your favorite authors?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's hard to choose favorites. But current favorite researchers, it's probably, I mean, John Keel has had a huge effect on how I look at things. It was really, I read Mothman Prophecies, but what really changed my mind on how I look at this phenomenon was probably a toss-up between Operation Trojan Horse and the Eighth Tower, which I read shortly thereafter, the Mothman Prophecies. So yeah, John Keel, Jacques Vallée, Ivan Sanderson. Yeah, those are probably my three main influences. And then of course, you know, my early influences, Linda Godfrey and Chad Lewis, just had a profound effect on my life. So I've really grown up in this field, if that makes sense. So
yeah. What is the Trojan Horse book actually? Is that about a certain incident, or is that something else? Operation
Trojan Horse is, oh my gosh, it's hard for me to say my favorite UFO book, but it might actually be my favorite UFO book. And so it's very expansive. It covers so much material. It's about, you know, tons of different accounts of UFOs and related phenomenon that John Keel wrote. So highly recommended if anyone is interested in Keel's work or UFOs in general.
All right. I just want to see if there's any questions over in the chat. And let's see. Also, you looked into the airship flap back in 1896, 1897. That's also a very fascinating topic as well, I believe. I think that's really interesting.
Oh, yeah. That's a period in time where I just feel like, because again, I'm looking at this phenomenon now almost from the standpoint of what are the belief systems about it as well, because I feel like there is kind of a give and take on the phenomenon and what people perceive about it. And the amazing thing with the airships is that I really feel like it's almost kind of like, you know, if fairy lore and our current extraterrestrial hypothesis are two sides of the same coin of this phenomenon, the airship flap is really kind of like the edge of that coin, because you have a very distinct set of beliefs about what people were seeing. And, you know, the flap of 1896 and 97 has all the hallmarks of like a modern day flap. You have tons of different sightings of different types of craft in the sky. You have descriptions of cigar-shaped crafts, you know, powerful searchlight beams. Yeah. In some areas, you even have congruent flaps of wild man encounters and black panthers, which we also see with UFO flaps. And so it has all the hallmarks of a modern flap. But the predominant belief at the time was simply that some inventor somewhere had come up with the amazing flying machine. And, you know, that's the reports that you get that are people phrasing it as, we saw this amazing machine. And, you know, and I do think you do have to be careful with that time period, because there was, you know, a lot of yellow journalism, there was a lot of exaggeration, but there is a core of genuine reports that I am very interested in. And, you know, even people who claim to have met the occupants of these craft, the phenomenon, you know, if you do come at this from the idea that it perhaps does have the ability to be reflective, the phenomenon almost seems to go out of its way then to prove whatever the predominant theory of the time is. And with the airship flap, everything is phrased as, we met the occupants, it was an inventor, or it was a crew, you know. And so I find that incredibly interesting. Wow. Because, of course, that era, the Victorian era really was, you know, that was when technological achievements, that was like, you know, the pinnacle of existence was ingenuity in technological matters. And so you do have these very fanciful, you know, we would call them steampunk machines being spotted. And of course that transitions then into our current extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is, you know, with the flying saucers of mid-century America, and even currently now, you know, with people's claiming they see craft and things like that. And prior to all this, it was phrased in a folkloric, fairy lore, or religious connotation, which the phenomena then too seemed to go out of its way to promote that. So that's my interest really in the 1896-97 flap.
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, I just want to say I'm trying to take calls. They're not connecting, and I apologize. I'm not sure. What would this show be without technical difficulties not happening? So I'm going to try right now again and see if that joins. Not seeing anyone. Let me just see if there's any way I can catch past caller, because we've had at least 3 different people trying to ring in here. Nope, I'm just going to have to say I'm sorry the phones are not working, and I apologize. Hopefully next week we will get them back at the radio station and the screener and all that. And so I'm going to say no calls, and I apologize for that. Anyway, so we have, I'm going to try one more time. We'll try this one more time. And caller, can you hear me? Not sure why it won't join. Here's another one. We'll try again. Caller, can you hear me? Well, I like the person that wrote me. They like that I have technical difficulties because they know it's a real show. So, all right, we're going to take down the, for some reason, I've had 2 or 3 people trying to ring in, and it's just not, it's not working. So I do apologize for that. And this is the last time I'm trying. Okay, so we've got about 15 more minutes, and let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, what you feel as though what you like about Wisconsin. You said early on there was some, I don't know what you called it, but some type of area where something was, a lot of things happened.
Oh, like a window area?
Or like a flap, there were flaps happening. Now everybody keeps trying to call in. It's just not going to work. So, all right, callers, I'm sorry, it's not going to work tonight. I'm not sure why. I forget what you called it. It was like a woman's name or some type of area in Wisconsin where some things were happening.
Oh.
Yeah, I can't. Well, that's all right.
I think you do.
So let's talk more about, though, are there any other UFO sightings that you investigated that you found were interesting, that came in while you had your short stint there at MUFON?
Boy, there were, I think that for me, a huge focus is put on kind of the more like technological looking sightings, craft and things like that. The ones that I really liked were definitely the soft sightings of luminous objects. And so I know that there were plenty of sightings of orbs that I researched that were really interesting. I think probably, though, if I had to choose like a most memorable case, and this had a lot to do with a witness, I had a witness who wrote in the report, and I called and talked to him, and he listed himself as anonymous because he owned a business, and his sighting was of this silver object, which he saw over a field, and the sighting in and of itself really wasn't anything completely earth-shattering, and that was another thing that hit me researching MUFON. Is a lot of these sightings, it's something that happened. Any investigation is just to chronicle what happened, to try and go out and it's trying to find where lightning strikes twice with many of these cases. But the response that he gave me just was it really renewed kind of my, the fantastic nature of this field, because he really said that, he didn't know what it was. And, he went through his whole thing, and I took all my notes, and at the end of it I was like, well, do you have any questions? And he just said, well, what is it? And I was like, well, there's a lot of theories, but I really don't know. And it was that particular sighting, really was that particular witness that really just kind of reaffirmed exactly why I am intrigued by this, because there are things that are anomalous that really do change a person's perception of life. And normal people who typically have a lot of times have no interest in this field prior, or even a passing interest, experience them and then kind of have to come to grips with something that is completely outside of their accepted reality. So that's the one that really stands out for me.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm sure it must be really interesting to actually, speak to someone personally. Were you now? Was it just phone calls, or did you actually ever meet with anybody?
For the cases which I did, it was all just phone calls. So you typically, like, if it is something like, a close encounter or something like that, you will have to meet with the witness and talk to them in person, preferably, or of course Skype or anything like that would work as well. But unfortunately, I never had a case of that magnitude that I had to investigate. So, always wanted one, but...
Yeah, yeah. Okay, callers, okay, you can stop now. People keep trying to call in. So, anyway, let's see. So, what about, let's just go one more time about any interesting UFO encounters that you're aware of that are, kind of unknown when you've looked at this topic in Wisconsin, or is that about it of all you can think of? Because we can always talk. I know that you looked into the Kelly Hopkinsville as well, which is definitely not in Wisconsin. But are there any more you want to talk about, or would you like to talk more about the for the new listener that's never heard of the Kelly Hopkinsville one? That's a really interesting one.
Yeah, Wisconsin, see, it's one of those things where we have a lot of different UFO cases. And there are some, my issue is that I tend to really kind of have a sprawling interest in this stuff. And so, even though I started with, an awareness about Wisconsin, I have definitely kind of focused in on, particular interesting cases from all over. So I guess we could go to Kelly Hopkinsville if you'd like.
Sure, yeah. Yeah. Now, a lot of people have heard this case a number of times, but it's still, for the new person just looking into this is pretty fascinating. I can't remember the year, but if you looked into it, you know about that. What year was this?
1955. It was in August. And the intriguing thing is I feel like, most of the emphasis in the Kelly Hopkinsville encounters put on the entities observed, which, believe me, are incredibly interesting. That whole thing deserves, a lot, the interest that's put on it. But the sighting actually started when a man saw what he described as a silver flying saucer shooting rainbow-colored flames that dropped in a nearby gully. And his name was Billy Ray Taylor, and he was staying with the Sutton family. And so he saw this UFO, and then, went back to the house, and later that night, about 8 o'clock, the family dog was actually the first member of the family to notice that anything was the matter. It started going totally crazy. And so the oldest son, named Lucky, actually went outside to look, and he saw this glowing orb moving towards the house. And then he realized that it really wasn't an orb, it was this shining being that was floating towards the house. And the interesting thing with the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter is that they're pretty much the poster child of children of alien encounters or alien entities. You have these big-headed, big-eyed things with spindly bodies floating towards the house. And it was just pandemonium from that point on. The family actually barricaded themselves in the home, and they started shooting at these entities as they were hovering closer and closer to the house. And the interesting thing is that, and this occurs very often in different paranormal encounters, even though they were shooting point blank at these entities, there was absolutely no effect on them. The most that these things responded to by being shot point blank was actually roll over and drift to the ground and then crawl back into the underbrush. And this happened for hours. This family was completely under siege by these glowing entities which kept coming towards the house in waves. And the really interesting thing to me is that the method of attack for this, even though there was a very cliche flying saucer sighting directly prior to this event, and you have these very alien-looking entities coming at the house, the method in which they approach the house always kind of reminded me far more of monsters or cryptids. There's a Sasquatch encounter that John Keel details in one of his books, where apparently there was this one farmhouse that just waves of Sasquatches kept on rushing towards the house. And, you kind of have the exact same thing in the Kelly Hopkinson encounter, only it's framed as an extraterrestrial occurrence. So the family actually at one point decided to go get the police. The police came, didn't find anything. As soon as the police left, guess what came back? The entities. So it's a very intriguing encounter.
Was there a police report filed, and what about all the gunshots and all that? I mean, that must have looked pretty mysterious to any officer.
Oh yeah, the police did believe that, they took the family seriously. And it's kind of unfortunate because then once it hit the media, it was really painted as kind of like, a UFO encountered by hillbillies and things like that. And that's a really sad thing to see that happen. And that happens quite a bit, I would say, with some of these UFO encounters and cryptid encounters. But the police at the time did take it very seriously. There was no evidence that anyone had been drinking or anything like that. My favorite thing about this case, though, is probably the fact that after the fact, because there was an Air Force investigation, the conclusion that the Air Force came to was that there had been a traveling circus, and there must have been a troop of silver-painted monkeys which escaped from the circus, and that's what these people saw. And as to how these things could be bulletproof and float towards the establishment, I have no idea. But yeah, so that's kind of a very interesting take.
Yeah. And did anyone come and investigate that situation? That's a part I've never heard of. I know the story got out, but I mean, did anyone really that took this seriously besides the police at the time? I don't know in 1955 who would be doing that, but was there someone that took first-hand accounts of that? Do you know?
I'm actually not sure on that. That's a good question. But I know, yeah, the police and the Air Force were the only ones that I know of that were involved off the top of my head. But.
Yeah. Okay. Well, very good. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Had a good night with you. I really appreciate your efforts, and hopefully we'll see a book from you someday and see you out there. So thank you very much. And again, have a good night. And so that's going to be it for our show this evening. So you take care.
Yep, you too, and thanks again.
All right, everyone. So next week we have Kurt Collins is going to be on, and we're going to be talking about. He has written a number of blogs that is getting quite a bit of attention out there in the UFO world. So we'll be speaking with him next week. Remember that you can go over to podcastufo.com, and over there you will see our blog that Charles wrote on the Socorro investigation. Make sure that you check that out. I do appreciate everyone that helps out with the show, and anyone that's looking to do that. You can find all that information over at Podcast UFO. Don't forget to check out our Facebook page, and that's facebook.com facebook.com/podcast UFO, and we're also on Twitter, but I have no idea what that is. I think it's all connected to Facebook, but I think it's just plain Podcast UFO over on Twitter. I'll be honest with you, I never look at Twitter, so I really don't know. It's always fun I don't know if anyone has listened to the shows when Kurt Collins is on. Years ago, we did a show with about the Cash Landrum case, and we had trying to remember Landrum on. I can't remember his first name. So Kurt and Chris Lambright both did that. We did that show, all three of us together, and that's a fascinating show. That's in our archives. And speaking of that, if you supported the show, you can still gain access to the archived shows at podcastufo.com. I just need to know which ones that you're looking for, and we can set that up where I'll send you the file for that. So anyone can support the show, and with that you get an access to our 2-hour shows. And believe me, there's a lot of them. I think there's over 200 of them. And they are on our website. You can see supporters If you click on that on the menu bar, that'll go to that page there. And there's a list of them and who the guests were. And we seem to be getting a lot of requests for those from supporters, and you are welcome to request those. All right, so that's it for me this evening. Again, I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week. Keep safe and keep healthy and keep your eyes to the sky.